Hey everyone, no story this month. I'm going to pause on the stories and come back with one in February. Of all the episodes I released so far, last year's Black History Month episode is going to be the first re-release of the podcast. On that episode, my friend and pastor, Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, shared a little bit about the Black church tradition and his family's connection to MLK. It seemed like a perfect episode to re-release today. I hope you enjoy listening to it again. We'll be back in a few weeks with a great Black History Month episode. And as always, please tell a friend what we're up to. I have some great guests planned for 2026, and I need more people to hear it. Thanks. Yo, how excited am I to have this guest on the podcast. My friend and pastor, Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, is today's guest. I originally thought it'd be neat to explore what was special to him about being in the pulpit, but as we got into it, he told me that the Black church tradition is actually where he feels at home, and that's going to be the focus of today's discussion. On another note, I'm releasing this episode on a really interesting day. Today in the U.S., we celebrate Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. However, we're also about to inaugurate a man who represents the exact opposite of what Dr. King stood for, politically and theologically. After producing this episode, I felt like I needed to release this episode on this day, because voices like Pastor Moss's are more important now than ever. I'll end this intro by just saying that I've been a member of Trinity United Church of Christ on the south side of Chicago for almost 30 years. It's my first real church home, and for reasons you're about to hear, I hope you'll agree, I couldn't be any luckier. Enjoy the episode. I want to welcome my next guest to the podcast. There's so many things we could talk about, but luckily we have a plan for today, and we'll try our best to stick to that plan. I'm pretty sure there's no way we'll do this quickly, but we'll try our best. With that said up front, I'm really glad that you agreed to do the podcast, so let's get started with an introduction for our listeners. Can you introduce yourself?
Certainly. First of all, it's great to be on the podcast, Keith. My name is Otis Moss III, and I am a father, I am a husband, I am a son, I am a pastor, and I'm also an artist.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I could add there, like hip-hop head, comic book nerd, and a couple of other that jazz head for sure. But you have a lot of passions outside of the things that may be your immediate identity. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. Everything from poetry to film to hip-hop, African-American culture, jazz, music, and the intersection of Black religiosity with the shaping of American democracy.
Incredible, incredible. And this might be a little bit tricky because it goes back quite a ways, but how would you say we know each other? When did we meet?
The first time we met, I remember, was when we came to Trinity as a family. I came as pastor. I believe we encountered each other when I was doing the youth revivals, but I remember our conversation and you sharing with me that you worked at this company called Bain, and we had some conversations about hip hop because I think I dropped a lyric in a sermon and you knew the lyric at the time.
Yeah, you do that a lot. And for people listening to your sermons, it's like they just say, oh, that was a really great line. I'm like, yeah, he didn't write it though. You're like quoting scripture. You're quoting scripture. You're quoting Kendrick. You're quoting all kinds of folks. And I remember seeing you as a guest preacher. I don't remember what it was. It might have been one of the youth revivals or something else. And a few years after that, I remember hearing that you were coming as the senior pastor and starting your 2 years at the church for the transition, I think in 2006. And I remember being really excited because, I take a lot of notes when I'm listening to people on Sunday. And I like people, when I look at my notes, if my notes are organized, and I feel like they were organized, and I really like that. And so knowing that you were going to take over for Reverend Wright, who did that really well, I realize there's a lot of other parts of the job, but that's kind of where I was at the time. It's like, he's going to mess up my notes or not. But I was really excited when you came in, and then over the years as a board member and just as a friend, I've gotten to know you and your family a lot better. We also, like you said, share a lot of common interests and a lot of common friends. And a highlight for me was last year we caught up briefly at the North Sea Jazz Fest with Moop, who was also on the podcast. And it was just really great to get to know you better. So I'm glad you're here today.
Man, I'm excited, and it's wonderful to be with you. It's been phenomenal to witness your family grow and develop. Your boys, my son and daughter, they're kind of the same age category, and watching them flourish and thrive on so many levels is always a beautiful thing to witness.
I realize this part of the conversation could be a whole episode. Frankly, it could be a whole podcast series. But let's talk about your first exposure to the Black church. What was your introduction to it? And I know part of this story, but I think it's important to start here for this conversation.
I came to understand the Black church as a village network. And when I say village network, I mean like an African village network where you have elders, you have children, you have parents, and they see you as part of your family. And there was a woman by the name of Miss White who had a big pocket book, not a purse, but a pocketbook. And she would dig into that pocketbook and she would always pull out peppermint and butterscotch, sometimes strawberry,
Right.
but most of the time peppermint and butterscotch. And she would, pass it on to me and to my friends in the church, probably about 4 or 5 or whatnot. But I remember her kindness, not just in giving the peppermint and butterscotch, but I remember she would press the candy in your hand. She would say, "I'm proud of you. I'm praying for you, and I love you." Not just to me, but to every young person she would encounter. That's why she had a pocketbook. She had a whole lot of candy. But that was her ministry. And you felt that this elder was someone who was a part of your family and wanted to see you thrive. That was my first understanding of what I call the village network within the Black church.
And where were you geographically? Was that at home in Ohio or were you someplace else?
We were in Cincinnati, Ohio. My father was pastoring at the Mount Zion Church in Cincinnati.
And did you feel like you had a lot of family in the church? Was it Miss White and others, or was it, a whole village?
It was an entire village. So there were all these aunts and uncles. I remember a person, one woman, she's about 90 something years, she's about 97 now. Her name is, call her Aunt Clarice. But one day I was small, she said, "You know my name." And I said, Clarice, I mean, Aunt Clarice. She said, "That's right, baby. You better put a handle on that name." And from that moment on, she was one of my biggest supporters. So her husband, who was called Uncle Hoover, who was also a former police officer, was a deacon. They would come to all my track meets. They would come to my basketball games. And she cooked every Sunday, but she cooked for like 40 people. I'm talking about, this is like Thanksgiving meals.
Right.
And she was an amazing, amazing cook, man. But that was normative to have those relationships.
And when you're talking about that as a 5-year-old, I can imagine, given what you mentioned about your father being the pastor, that the Black church was always present. But when did you know that's where you wanted to be? Because it's one thing to sort of see it every day and say, wow, it's great to be a part of this village, but I actually want to be a leader in this village. I want to be a voice in this village. When did that happen for you?
I was much older when I was a teen, witnessing the work that we were involved in as a church. We were always involved in some type of protest, social justice work. We were involved in the anti-apartheid movement before people really even knew what anti-apartheid was. And when I became a teen, I got a chance to actually involve myself in the movement. And it was from the teachings of the church that you're to be a voice for those who are voiceless. You're to be committed to those who have been marginalized. This is the role of Christ. Christ is always with those who are on the margins. And as a teen, I saw the anti-apartheid movement in connection with my faith, which was very different from other people who were part of churches that they closed themselves off from the world. We were always attempting to alleviate suffering in the world.
Right. There's a lot of people who say, you should leave politics out of your church and you should leave the society out of the pulpit. This is about spirituality and your relationship with God. And it sounds like you were in a church that was very different. And it was also a kind of a different time. We're about the same age, but I know that your father had a role in the civil rights movement. So it was more than just about the faith community in some ways, right?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. My mother and father were both a part of the movement. My father was one of the primary organizers of what was called the Atlanta Sit-In Movement, or the movement for human rights in Atlanta, where students got together to desegregate Atlanta They're real clear. They said we weren't trying to integrate, we're trying to desegregate. We believed that we had the same opportunities, rights, and we did
Hmm.
not want any type of shadow keeping us from human flourishing and thriving. So that was always a part of my life.
Hmm. And did they bring people from the movement through as a when you were a child? And did you get to meet some of them? And was it part of them coming to the church, or was it just part of them being in your family system, so to speak?
Yeah, this is both hand. It's both
Okay.
hand. One particular individual, Andrew Young, who was came to speak for my father's anniversary. Afterwards, I'm waiting for when you're a PK, you do a lot of waiting for your parents afterwards.
Right. PK
He's
is
ready.
preacher's kid for those listening.
Yes, yes, that's right. PKs, preachers' kids. You end up waiting. You're ready to go eat. I mean, you don't want to hang around church and talk and all that kind of stuff. So here comes Andrew Young, Ambassador Andrew Young, former Congressman Andrew Young, Mayor Andrew Young, organizer Andrew Young, and he does something that many people probably of his stature don't do. I'm just sitting over in the corner, minding my own business, hungry, and he says, "Otis, you know anything about Howard Thurman?" And I'm looking at him. I'm like, Andrew Young's asking about Howard Thurman. I was like, I heard the name,
Right.
and he said, you ought to read some Howard Thurman. I want you to get Howard Thurman. I know your father has Howard Thurman in his library. It's like, yeah, I believe he does. This is what I want you to do. I want you to read the book, and then I want you to call me so that we can talk about Howard Thurman. I'm 11.
Right.
11 at
Right.
the
That's heavy
time.
stuff. That's college level, graduate level reading.
Yes, yes, I'm 11, but because it was Andrew Young, uh, I wanted to do my best to be able to respond to his particular request. So that's when I first started reading. That's the reason I probably have absolutely fallen in love with Howard Thurman's work, is because at 11, I was attempting to read and understand Howard Thurman so I
Hmm.
could have a conversation with Andrew Young.
Right. And one of the things that I know from listening to you for well over a decade now is you are very well studied and very well read, and you're incorporating a lot of different genres and types of information into your message. For those listening, can you give me the two sentence version ish of who Howard Thurman is? I realize, again, this could be a whole episode.
Yeah, it could be an old episode, but Howard Thurman was a graduate of Morehouse College. He was a mystic, theologian, philosopher, and he wrote a book in 1949 entitled Jesus and the Disinherited. That book is the foundation of what we call Black liberation theology, but was the one book. There were three books that Dr. King carried with him everywhere: a Bible, a copy of the Constitution, and Jesus and the Disinherited. And if you listen to Dr. King, you're hearing the theology of Howard Thurman.
Speaking of Dr. King, I heard this rumor back in the day that I just want to confirm for folks. Was he a part of your family network as well?
He was very much so.
In what way?
He performed the wedding ceremony for my parents. My father was, at one point, he was co-pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. He was very close with the King family. My mother was the office manager for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And so Dr. King performed the ceremony. Andrew Young was one of the groomsmen, along with it's really crazy. I have a picture sitting over here somewhere. Where is it? In my office, that has my parents' engagement party, a surprise party that was thrown by Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King Jr. In that picture is everyone from the civil rights movement. So
That's
you go, you
incredible.
see Andrew Young, you see Ralph Abernathy, you see C.T. Walker. You go down the list. You're like, wait a minute, that's the person from the Student Nonviolent Coordinator
Right.
Committee. That's the person from. It was unbelievable. 1966
Wow.
at the Eden Rock Hotel in Miami, which was the retreat for the SCLC, where Dr. King was going to make the decision to come out against the Vietnam
Mm-hmm.
War. And
Mm-hmm.
they threw a party for my parents at the same time.
Now, every part of me as a podcast producer is saying, end on that note. But I have to get one more clarification in, just related to that, because you mentioned a term there, Black liberation theology. Can you unpack what that means quickly for folks, just so they understand it? Because I don't want to gloss over it. It's very important background for the conversation we're going to have coming up next.
Liberation theology, which has been highlighted by someone who just recently passed, Gustav Gutierrez, Latino brother, that we should look theologically from below and not above. A person by the name of James Cone in the US takes Gutierrez and says, yes, we look from the below and not above, but we look from the lens of Black people because racism is a sin. And then we look at the lens of Jesus. Jesus was concerned about those who had their backs against the wall. Jesus was in a colonized situation. Jesus was part of a minority group. Jesus was concerned about the liberation and transformation of those who were poor, downcast, and marginalized. And that is, in a nutshell, what liberation theology is. It is biblical, it's theological, and it's looking at Jesus through the framing of one who wants to turn the world right side up because it's been turned upside down by systems of oppression.
Rev, I want to try and talk about some of the things that make your home, the Black Church, special. And I'm not sure where we should start because there's a lot of things that I know we could start with. But why don't we start with what you told me before, which was the artistry of the church? What does that mean in this context? Why is that one of the things that makes the Black Church special to you?
Yeah, the Black Church at its best, when it's functioning and thriving and healthy, is a place of creativity and artistry. The artist you love, the musicians you are drawn to, the singers you connect with, the poets that you want to hear have their roots, meaning gumbo, but roots, talking about soil, from the Black Church, a space that taught people poetry from the pulpit,
Mm-hmm.
a space that created unique musical workshops, though not formal, but they were like the Juilliards, where people could learn how to play in ways they could never learn in other spaces by ear and by what was written in the page in front of them, where they could learn about the dance and learn the brilliance of improvisation. If I may give a story, everybody has heard the song, the sermon "I Have a Dream," but what people don't know is that the phrasing "I have a dream" is complete improvisation. Is that Dr. King is standing before the people. And then Mahalia Jackson says, tell them about the dream. Dr. King becomes the homiletical DJ at that moment, remembers what a woman by the name of Prathia Hall said in Albany, Georgia, when she prayed. He puts that on the turntable of his artistry and imagination, and then begins to remix I Have a Dream by using that as a phrase, but then begins to do a public enemy moment by critiquing the KKK by saying, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain. Well,
Mm-hmm.
Black people, when they heard it, shouted like crazy because
Mm-hmm.
Stone Mountain was the home of the KKK.
Exactly.
Then he said, let freedom ring from the Smoky Mountains. Well, the Smoky Mountains were the home of the KKK. So all the Black people were like, oh man, did Dr. King just throw shade at the
Yes, he
KKK?
did.
While all the white people are like, that's a nice rhetorical phrase. He's doing double entendre and mixing in the middle of the March on Washington, which shows the artistry and the brilliance of what comes out of the Black church tradition.
That's incredible. And for people who aren't familiar with all of the things you just said, I remember as a high school kid, I did a program at Georgia Tech, and they took us out to see like a laser show at night at Stone Mountain.
Mm.
And I wouldn't say I was as aware as I should have been, but I knew we were in a different part of Georgia. And if I remember correctly, they had like a Confederate carving in the side of the mountain.
In the side of the mountain. It's one of the largest Confederate monuments in the U.S.
And I'm
Stone
thinking to
Mountain.
myself, this is where they're taking the college kids, or this is where they're taking the high school kids to enjoy a night out in this environment. It
Hmm.
was really wild. You talk about the creativity and the nurturing soil for people to build their art and to learn their art and to learn their improv. I remember watching a season of American Idol when Fantasia won. And I don't watch the show a lot, but I remember in the finals, the song they had to sing to had a choir in the background.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking, oh, well, this is done. I was like, because she clearly learned how to sing in the church, and they're going to give her a choir
Absolutely.
for the final. I was like, we might as well just mail this one in now. I noticed that you inject a lot of quotes and other art forms into your sermons, like you just did in that description, by the way, for those listening
Mhm.
carefully. Was it hard to bring that part of yourself into the pulpit? I've seen Otis Jr., your father, preach several times, and he doesn't do that as much. But you bring a
Mhm.
very different angle, and you bring, as some people would say, your whole self into the pulpit,
Mhm.
whether that's being
Mhm.
creative or vulnerable or upset or frustrated or educated, or you bring all of that with you, like gumbo in some sense, to the pulpit.
Mhm.
Was that a hard bridge to cross for you?
That's a great question, Keith. That is great. It took me time, but it wasn't hard because I'd witnessed a form of that over and over again. So my father, he's Southern, very very much Southern in terms, and he would bring his full self. But you would notice he brings in Black culture and African culture,
Mm-hmm.
but he does it in this really very subtle way
Right.
of just dropping these pieces of Black history, very organic, or listening to a person such as CT. Wyatt T. Walker, who would do the same thing with quotes left and right,
Mm-hmm.
and or Dr. Wright. Dr. Wright was quoting Scott. He's got these scholars,
Mm-hmm.
boom, boom, boom. He's hitting this scholar in so and so's book, and da, 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 he
Mm-hmm.
gives these wonderful quotes. And so I always witnessed that. I was one who was very much moved by, hip hop culture, jazz music, Black poetry and literature,
Mm-hmm.
and Black cinematic work.
Right.
So I wanted to bring those elements into the presentation because of that was part of who I was, and I think that preaching is a form of art, and that you have to bring all of your colors to the pulpit.
It's very well said. And I would add that from watching it, it also brings the congregation or the audience together, depending on the context, because you span generations with your references, you span generations with your stories, and we all sort of get the message because different parts of it resonate to everybody in the room, regardless of the diversity in the room. And so it's really neat to see that. And it's also inspiring and enlightening to hear that you think about that as the artistry of what it is that you're doing when you're delivering a message. I appreciate the creativity in the Black church and the artistry that comes from it. What else makes the Black church special to you as you call it your home?
Well, there's the community, as I mentioned, the Village Network, where people rally and come together in a particular way. Again, when the space is healthy, and then there is this embedded theology or spirituality of resilience. So it's community and resilience are these two pieces. So you're taught that you are connected to other people
Mm-hmm.
and people who went before you and people who are not yet born.
Mm-hmm.
That's the community. The resilience you are taught, since you are on the shoulders of other people, you need to know how they did what they did. So if we are talking about a person of faith like Harriet Tubman, Harriet Tubman says, I'm bringing you to freedom, these 300 people. And if you don't want to go, I can send you to heaven if you want to. Harriet Tubman,
Right.
she
Wasn't
was
playing.
something else. But what she was also saying is that I am not considered to be a full human being in the eyes of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not considered to be fully have full agency because of my gender, but it's not about me. I choose, I make the choice to make the world better for my children. It's a choice, and God has anointed me to do this work. That's extraordinary for someone who doesn't have, in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the Constitution, but chooses to expand the democracy for her children, but ultimately for everybody. And that's what Black folk have always done. Whenever we fight, we end up expanding for everyone, not just for ourselves.
Now, how is that different in the Black church, which we're talking about in this context, from other traditions?
Other traditions close themselves off from the world. Other traditions make a sacred secular separation. In
Mm,
other words, what I do on Sunday has nothing to do with what I do on Monday. Well, if that is the case, then guess what? You can have slaves because it has nothing to do with your faith.
right.
But when sacred and secular merge together, your spirituality becomes embodied.
Mm-hmm.
How I live,
Mm-hmm.
how I speak, how I interact. In the words of Howard Thurman, God places a crown above our heads we will spend the rest of our lives growing tall enough to wear. Meaning I will never reach it, but every day I'm stretching to be better. The Black church tradition, and I have to always clarify, Black church tradition. I'm not talking about a Black church. I'm sorry, I'm not talking about a church with just Black people. There's a whole lot of churches with Black people, but they don't function within the Black church tradition.
Right.
They will align themselves with a white evangelicalism and an ideology that is counter to the thriving and flourishing of their community, and a tradition that does not seek to alleviate human suffering, a tradition that is not centered on seeing everybody as having the imprint of the divine upon them. That's just a an Americanized, or I call it capitalism in ecclesiastical garments,
Mm-hmm.
tradition. The
Mm-hmm.
Black church tradition is always seeking to alleviate suffering and allowing people to flourish at the highest level.
And when you talk about someone like Harriet Tubman, who we read about in history books and is a giant in American history, you're talking about something a little more fundamental to the Black church as being the fertile ground that produces extraordinary people. And
Mm-hmm.
she is clearly one of hundreds or thousands that you could point to. Are there some in your life or contemporary examples that you sort of say, I'm still seeing that today. I've seen that during my lifetime, and I've heard about that with my immediate family and my relatives of how the Black church nurtured them to be great.
You see somebody like, say, a Bishop William Barber, who comes out of the Black church tradition and has organized what is known as the Moral Mondays movement. And what is fascinating about the Moral Mondays movement, it started in North Carolina, a small movement comes out of the Black church tradition, but he started organizing poor white people and Native Americans. I mean, that's what Moral Mondays comes out of. And they said we have so much in common, one, and two, we all have the imprint of the divine upon us. Another person, friend of mine, Tracy Blackman, Reverend Tracy Blackman, who is a voice in Ferguson and has been a voice nationally in reference to the issues of race, breaking and casting aside misogyny, and a public theologian talking about the idea of, again, alleviating suffering. And then you have a new generation of activists who have been highly influenced, though they may have many critiques, but highly influenced by the Black church tradition at its finest. Black Lives Matter movement,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're talking about Otis Moss. I mean, even Palestinian activists in Palestine, in the West Bank, they saw the work of Dr. King, and they saw the work of SNCC, and they saw and they were like, we need to organize like this. They see a deep affinity in reference to what Black people were doing and wanted to build relationships. How do we create a movement in that same manner? So there is a real influence that we witness when the tradition is healthy and it's thriving. It influences other communities like the Dalits the Dalit community in India, who are considered to be of a particular caste, they have deep identification with the Black church tradition. And there needs to be more work that we need to do some work between folks in America and the Dalit community. The South African, the deep connection in terms of liberation theology. It's just a global spiritual tradition that finds its way to be into the hearts and spirits of so many people across the globe.
As we start to wrap up, I appreciate the creativity and the community and resilience you talked about as it relates to the Black church and more specifically the Black church tradition, which I'm learning as we're talking. You also mentioned the spirit and mindset of resistance and imagination when we were preparing for this. Can you say more about what those mean in this context?
Moral imagination is one of the greatest weapons the Black church tradition offers and humanity has in general when structures come toward us that seek to snuff out the light of human flourishing and thriving. Moral imagination is the idea that we can envision a world that is not yet, but we will function and work and build as if it already is. And Black people have always had to envision a world that doesn't exist because the world as it is, at best, only sees us as extras on a set of someone else's drama.
And how does that manifest or shape your approach to functioning and moving throughout the Black church tradition as a pastor?
It is, well, let me put it this way, as I learned from my father, he said that in your space, in your time, you are called to do good. And that's all you can do. And you are then called to give the baton to someone else when their space and their time will be called to do good. And maybe 7 generations from now, our great grandchildren will say, I'm so grateful for what my ancestors did. That's the work that we're called to do when we talk about building the kingdom of God and being a part of the kingdom, not king, but kingdom, that we are all connected in a larger network of mutuality.
Rev, that feels like the right place to end without asking any follow-up questions, and it gives people a lot of food for thought. One of the things that I did want to make sure we ended with is giving people the opportunity to learn about where they can hear and engage with Trinity and engage with your ministry and your leadership. Give us the socials. Where should we be? Where should we be going?
You can check us out on our website at Trinity United Church of Christ, trinitychicago.org. Check us out on IG or at Trinity United Church of Christ or Trinity Chicago, on YouTube, on Facebook. But the best place, there's this place on the south side of Chicago at 495th Street, the south side, the best side. I guarantee if you've never been to a space that is a part of the Black church tradition, it's like getting some good soul food. Once you taste it, you got to come back.
Right. And for those of you who are Bedside Baptist members, they do 3 live sermons on Sundays on YouTube as well. Rev, I will list those and the contact information in the socials as well as the service times, because I do think there is something special about physically being in the Black church as you experience the Black church tradition. I want to thank you for coming on today. I know you are very busy, especially this time of year. And just having known you for a long time, it was great to unpack this part of you, because I don't think we talk about this very much. We talk about a lot of other things and contemporary things. So thank you very much for the time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure, brother. And congratulations on the podcast. And keep shining your light everywhere.
Thanks for listening to this episode of My Home is Special. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes automatically. You can go to myhomeisspecial.com to see the full project and sign up for email updates. Be sure to follow KBevPhoto on Instagram or go to kbevphoto.com to see what I'm snapping these days. There's a lot on both to explore. For now, this is Keith, aka KBev, signing off. Peace.